Thomas Brennan stood in the snow holding the telegram that would end his loneliness or destroy what was left of his heart. The widow was coming. But the wire didn't mention the 2 half-starved children clinging to her skirts, or the debt collector riding 3 days behind them with a warrant, or the secret she carried that could unravel everything. When the stagecoach door opened and 3 pairs of desperate eyes met his, Tom made a choice that would set the whole territory talking. Some called it mercy. Others called it madness. He called it the only decent thing left to do. Before we begin, please subscribe and follow this story to the end. Comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. The snow fell like judgment that December morning, thick and relentless, covering the Montana territory in silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Thomas Brennan had been awake since before dawn, standing at the window of his ranch house, watching the storm gather strength, knowing that somewhere out there on the frozen road, a woman he'd never met was traveling toward a life she probably didn't want with a man she'd agreed to marry because hunger leaves few choices. He'd sent the money 3 weeks ago. $40 for passage from St. Louis, enough for a dress and shoes if she was careful enough to prove he wasn't looking for free labor disguised as a wife. The agency letter had been brief. Margaret Holloway, age 28. Educated, widowed, of sound moral character. Nothing about children. Nothing about desperation. Nothing true. His daughter Josephine sat at the table behind him, 8 years old and stubborn as winter itself, pushing oatmeal around her bowl without eating. "She coming today?" Josie asked. "Stage is due at noon," Tom said. "If the snow don't stop it." "Hope it does." He turned to look at her. "That ain't kind." "Don't care." Josie's chin lifted. "Mama wouldn't want some stranger here." Tom's jaw tightened. His wife Anna had been dead 3 years, taken by fever so sudden he still woke some mornings expecting to find her beside him. "Your mama would want you raised proper," he said quietly. "Can't do that alone." "Been doing fine so far." "Fine ain't the same as right." Josie stood, scraping her chair back hard enough to scar the floor. "I ain't calling her mama." "Nobody's asking you to." "Good." She grabbed her coat from the hook. "I'll be in the barn." "Josie." But she was already gone, slamming the door so hard the window rattled. Tom stood there in the sudden silence, wondering if he'd made a mistake bigger than loneliness. Wondering if a mail-order bride could ever be anything more than a business arrangement. Neither party wanted, wondering if he'd just invited heartbreak back into a house that had barely survived it the first time. The stagecoach arrived 2 hours late, crawling up the mountain road, through snow that had turned the world white and treacherous. Tom stood on the porch watching it come, hat pulled low, coat buttoned tight, every muscle in his body tense with something that felt too much like fear. When the coach finally stopped and the driver climbed down, shaking snow from his hat, Tom saw the man's face and knew something was wrong. "She here," Tom called. The driver spat into the snow. "She's here, but there's more." "More what?" "More people." The driver pulled open the coach door. "Good luck, mister. You're gonna need it." The first person to step down wasn't a woman but a boy, maybe 14, tall and thin, with eyes that burned with anger, even from 20 feet away. He looked at Tom, the way men look at something they'd like to destroy, then turned to help someone inside. A woman appeared next. Not the neat, composed bride Tom had imagined, but someone who looked like she'd been traveling for weeks through hell itself. Her dress was good quality once, but now streaked with mud and worn through at the elbows. Her dark hair hung loose around her face, and her eyes, Tom would remember those eyes for the rest of his life, held the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than lack of sleep. It was the exhaustion of someone who'd run out of hope so many times she'd stopped believing it existed. She stepped down carefully, one hand gripping the coach door, the other reaching back inside. That's when Tom saw the third passenger, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, so small and pale, she looked like she might disappear into the snow. She didn't make a sound as the woman Margaret, Tom assumed, lifted her down and held her close. The driver tossed down 2 battered carpet bags and a small trunk. "That's everything," he said. "You paid through to here, ma'am. Anything else is between you and him." Margaret nodded slowly. The boy moved closer to her, positioning himself like a shield. Tom stepped off the porch, his boots crunching through 6 inches of fresh snow. When he got close enough to see her face clearly, he stopped. There were bruises there, faded yellow and green, mostly hidden, but visible when the light hit right. Old injuries trying to heal. "Mrs. Holloway," he said. "Miss," she corrected quietly. "I never married. The agency, they thought widow sounded better." The first lie revealed. Tom glanced at the children, then back at her. "And these? My brother Samuel." She touched the boy's shoulder. He jerked away from her hand. "And my niece Annie. Her mother, my sister, died 6 months ago. There was no one else." "Letter didn't mention children." "I know." Her voice was steady despite everything. "I thought if I told the truth, no one would answer. I was right. 3 agencies turned me away. Your money came from the 4th, and by then I was desperate enough to lie." The snow fell harder. The wind picked up, cutting through Tom's coat like it wasn't there. Behind him, he heard the barn door open. Josie would be watching now, taking all this in, adding it to whatever list of grievances she was building against the stranger who'd invaded her home. Tom looked at the boy Samuel, whose eyes promised violence if Tom said the wrong thing. He looked at the little girl Annie, who hadn't made a sound or changed expression since climbing down from the coach. He looked at Margaret, who stood there waiting for rejection, because it was all she'd learned to expect. The driver cleared his throat. "Mister, I got a schedule." "Then go," Tom said. "What about them?" Tom took a long breath, feeling the cold air burn his lungs. He thought about the empty house behind him, about Josie growing up wild without a woman's guidance, about the loneliness that had made him write to that agency in the first place. He thought about Anna, who'd once told him the measure of a man wasn't what he could carry alone, but what he was willing to share. "They're staying," he said. Margaret's eyes widened. "All of us. That's what I said. But I lied. I brought in 2 children who need shelter." Tom's voice was firm. "And a woman who was brave enough to travel 1,000 miles on a stranger's word. That ain't nothing." Samuel stepped forward, fists clenched. "We don't need your charity." "Good," Tom said. "'Cause I ain't offering charity. I'm offering work shelter and a chance. You don't want it, there's the road. But your aunt and your cousins stay." The boy's jaw worked. For a moment Tom thought he might actually swing. Then Margaret's hand touched his arm again, and this time he didn't pull away. "Samuel," she said softly. "Please." The fight went out of him slowly, like air leaving a punctured tire. He looked at the ground, at the snow covering his worn-out boots, and said nothing. Tom nodded toward the house. "Get inside before you freeze. We'll sort the rest later." He grabbed the trunk. Margaret picked up both carpet bags, struggling with the weight. Samuel moved to help her, but she shook her head, some stubborn pride making her carry her own burden. The little girl Annie stayed pressed against Margaret's side, silent as the snow itself. Josie was in the doorway when they reached it, arms crossed, face carved from stone. "Josie," Tom said. "Say hello." "Hello." The word was ice. Margaret stopped, meeting the girl's eyes. "You must be Josephine. Your father's told me about you." "He ain't told me nothing about you," Josie shot back, "except that you were coming alone." "Plans change. So do people." Josie looked at Tom. "Ain't that what you always say? Can't trust what changes." Tom's voice hardened. "Inside. Now." Josie turned and disappeared into the house. Tom set the trunk down by the door and looked at Margaret, whose face had gone even paler. "She'll come around," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Will she?" Margaret's voice was barely audible. "I wouldn't. If I were her, I'd hate me too." She carried the bags inside. Samuel followed, radiating hostility. Annie moved last, still silent, her small hand gripping Margaret's skirt. Tom stood on the porch for a moment longer, watching snow cover the tracks the stagecoach had left, erasing all evidence that anyone had arrived at all. Behind him, through the open door, he heard movement, quiet voices. The sound of strangers trying to become something else. He'd made his choice. Now he'd have to live with it. The house felt smaller with 6 people in it. Tom had built it 10 years ago, back when Anna was pregnant with Josie, and dreams still seemed like things that might come true. 3 rooms, the main room with kitchen and table, a bedroom he'd shared with Anna, and a small loft where Josie slept. It had been enough for a family of 3. For 6, it felt like trying to breathe in a closet. Margaret stood near the fire, Annie pressed against her side, both of them shivering despite the heat. Samuel had positioned himself by the window as far from Tom as the room allowed, his body language screaming that he was here under protest and planning his escape. Josie sat at the table, staring at the newcomers like they were wolves who'd wandered in from the cold. Tom cleared his throat. "There's stew on the stove. Not much, but it's hot." "We're fine," Samuel said quickly. "You ain't fine." Tom's voice was flat. "You're half frozen and half starved. Sit down and eat." "We don't take orders from Samuel." Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Please." The boy's mouth snapped shut. He glared at Tom for another moment, then stalked to the table and dropped into a chair hard enough to make it scrape. Margaret guided Annie to a seat, then sat beside her. The little girl stared at the table, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. Tom ladled stew into bowls, deer meat and potatoes, simple but filling, and set them down. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly. Josie snorted. Tom shot her a look. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling fire and spoons against tin bowls. Tom watched Margaret coax Annie into taking small bites, watched Samuel eat like he was angry at the food for existing, watched Josie refuse to look at anyone. Finally, Tom spoke. "We need to set some things straight." Samuel's head snapped up. "Here it comes." "Boy?" "I ain't a boy. I'm 14. Old enough to work, old enough to fight, old enough to know when someone's about to tell us how grateful we should be." "Samuel?" Margaret's face flushed, but Tom held up a hand. "Let him talk. He's got a right to be angry." Samuel blinked, surprised. "I do." "Sure. Your life got turned upside down. You're in a strange place with a strange man, and your aunt made promises you didn't agree to." Tom leaned back. "But being angry don't give you the right to be cruel. And it don't change the facts." "What facts?" "That you're here. That winter's coming down hard. That the nearest town is 15 miles through snow that'll kill you before you get halfway." Tom's voice was calm but immovable. "So, you got a choice. You can hate me and make everyone miserable, or you can accept that we're stuck with each other till spring and make the best of it." Samuel's jaw worked. "And if I choose hate, then you'll be real tired come April." For the first time, something flickered in the boy's eyes that wasn't anger. Not quite humor, but close. "You saying we're prisoners?" "I'm saying you're family." Tom looked at Margaret. "All of you. Whether you like it or not." Margaret's spoon clattered against her bowl. She pressed her hand over her mouth, eyes suddenly wet. "I ain't family," Josie said, her voice cold. "And neither are they." Tom turned to his daughter. "Josephine Rose Brennan, that's enough." "It ain't enough." Josie stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "Mama's only been gone 3 years, and you're already replacing her with them." She pointed at Margaret. "Some liar who brought a whole bunch of people you didn't ask for." "Josie, I hate you." The words exploded out of her. "I hate you, and I hate her, and I wish you'd never sent that stupid letter." She ran. Her footsteps pounded up the ladder to the loft, and then came the sound of her crying, muffled but audible. The silence that followed was crushing. Margaret stood slowly, her face stricken. "I should leave." "Sit down," Tom said. "Mr. Brennan?" "Tom. And sit down." She hesitated, then obeyed. Annie leaned against her, still silent. Samuel stared at his empty bowl. Tom rubbed his face. "I'm sorry. She ain't usually like this." "Yes, she is." Margaret's voice was gentle. "She's a little girl who lost her mother and is terrified of losing her father too. I don't blame her. I'd feel the same. She'll come around. Maybe." Margaret looked down at Annie. "Or maybe this was a mistake. Maybe—" "Stop." Tom's voice was firm. "You traveled 1,000 miles to get here. You're not leaving because my daughter threw a tantrum." "It's more than a tantrum. It's her home, her life. We're invading it." "You're joining it." Tom stood up, began clearing bowls. "There's a difference." Samuel finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Why are you doing this?" Tom paused. "Doing what?" "Helping us. You don't know us. We lied to you. We brought trouble." The boy's eyes were searching, desperate to understand. "Nobody helps people like us. Nobody." Tom set the bowls in the wash basin. When he turned back, his face was honest in a way that hurt to look at. "My wife died because I was too proud to ask for help when she got sick. Too proud to admit I couldn't handle it alone. By the time I swallowed that pride and rode for the doctor, it was too late." He paused. "I learned something from that. Learned that refusing help ain't strength. It's just fear wearing a different coat." Margaret's hand was pressed over her heart. "Mr. Brennan, Tom, I don't know what to say." "Don't say nothing." He glanced toward the loft where Josie's crying had finally quieted. "Just give it time. Give her time. Give all of this time." Samuel stood up slowly. "Where do we sleep?" "You'll take my room tonight. I'll bunk out in the barn." "No." Margaret shook her head. "We can't take your bed." "You can and you will. It's too cold for the children in the barn, and I ain't putting you in the loft with Josie when she's liable to push you off the edge." Tom managed a tired smile. "I've slept in worse places." Margaret looked at Annie, who was nearly asleep, sitting up, her head nodding forward. Then she looked at Samuel, whose anger had finally burned down to exhaustion. Finally, she looked at Tom. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know you didn't sign up for this." "Maybe I did," Tom said. "Just didn't know it yet." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Behind him, he heard Margaret start to cry, soft, broken sounds she was trying to hide. He heard Samuel's awkward attempts to comfort her. He heard Annie's continued silence, which somehow felt louder than any scream. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clearing, revealing stars so bright and cold they looked like ice. Tom stood on the porch for a moment, breathing the frozen air, thinking about choices and consequences, and the way life never quite goes the way you plan it. From the barn, his horse whinnied softly. From the loft, Josie was silent. From the bedroom, Margaret's quiet weeping finally faded. Tom pulled his coat tighter and walked toward the barn, leaving footprints in fresh snow that would be covered by morning, leaving behind a house full of strangers who might, if they were lucky and stubborn enough someday, become something more. The night stretched ahead, long and cold and uncertain. But for the first time in 3 years, Thomas Brennan's house wasn't empty. And that, he thought, was a start. Morning came with the kind of cold that makes bones ache. Tom woke in the barn before dawn, his breath fogging in the air, hay stuck to his coat. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Margaret's bruised face, Samuel's anger, Annie's terrifying silence, Josie's tears. A whole collection of broken people under one roof, held together by nothing but his stubborn refusal to turn them away. He fed the horses, milked, the cow did all the morning chores by lantern light. By the time he approached the house, smoke was rising from the chimney. Someone was already awake. He stomped snow off his boots and pushed the door open. Margaret stood at the stove, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress, her hair hastily pinned. She jumped when he entered, then tried to cover her nervousness with a small smile. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I found the coffee, and there were eggs." The smell hit him, coffee and fried eggs, and something else, bread maybe. His stomach growled. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to earn my keep." "You ain't a servant." "Then what am I?" The question hung between them, honest and raw. "I don't know what to call this. What we are." Tom hung his coat on the hook. "Guess we'll figure that out as we go." She turned back to the stove. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. "The children are still asleep. All of them. I checked on Josephine. She was curled up in her blankets facing the wall. She does that when she's upset. Does she have reason to be upset often?" Tom paused. "Since Anna died, yeah, she does." Margaret cracked another egg into the pan. "What was she like, your wife?" "Strong, stubborn, could outwork most men I knew." Tom sat at the table. "She loved this place, loved making it a home. When she died, it stopped being one. And you thought bringing in a stranger would fix that. I thought bringing in someone who needed fixing might remind me how it's done." Margaret looked at him over her shoulder, something shifting in her eyes. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? Someone cruel, or someone desperate enough to overlook anything?" She set a plate in front of him. "Men who send for mail-order brides usually want one thing: free labor, or—" She didn't finish the sentence. "I want help raising Josie right," Tom said quietly. "And I want someone to talk to besides horses. That's all." "Just talking. We'll see." He met her eyes. "I ain't gonna force nothing on you, Margaret. You got my word on that." She nodded slowly, something like relief crossing her face. "Thank you." They ate in comfortable silence. Tom was halfway through his second egg when footsteps creaked on the stairs. Samuel appeared dressed but disheveled, his hair sticking up on one side. He stopped when he saw them together. "Morning," Tom said. Samuel grunted, moving to the stove. Margaret had already set aside a plate for him. He took it without thanks and sat as far from Tom as possible. "Sleep all right?" Tom asked. "No. Bed too soft." "Bed's fine. Everything else ain't." Margaret sighed. "Samuel, what, I'm being honest. You want me to pretend this is normal, that we didn't just move in with a complete stranger who bought you like—" "Stop." Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. "Tom didn't buy anyone. He offered help. There's a difference." "Is there?" Samuel's eyes burned. "You signed a contract. You agreed to marry him for money. What do you call that?" "I call it survival," she said softly. "Something you'll understand better when you're older." "I understand plenty now." Tom stood up, scraping his chair back. Both of them looked at him. "Samuel, you want to hate me, fine, but you're going to do it with a full stomach and a roof over your head. After breakfast, I'm going to show you the ranch. You can help with chores or you can watch. Your choice." "Why would I help you?" "Because that's what men do. They work. They contribute. They don't just take." Samuel's jaw clenched. "I ain't taking nothing from you." "You're eating my food and sleeping in my house. That's taking." Tom's voice was calm but unyielding. "Only question is whether you're going to give something back." The boy stared at him, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Finally, he looked away. "Fine. I'll work." "Good." Tom grabbed his coat. "Meet me outside in 10 minutes." He left before either of them could respond. Outside, the sun was just starting to rise, turning the snow pink and gold. Tom breathed deep, trying to center himself. 2 days ago, his life had been simple. Lonely, but simple. Now it felt like trying to juggle knives. The barn door opened. Josie emerged, her face puffy from crying, her coat buttoned wrong. "Morning, sweetheart," Tom said. She didn't answer, just walked past him toward the chicken coop. "Josie." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I know you're angry, Tom said. "And I know you didn't ask for any of this. But they're here now, and we're going to make it work." "You're going to make it work." Josie's voice was small and broken. "I don't got a choice." "You got the choice to be kind or be cruel. That's always a choice." She finally turned to look at him. Tears tracked down her cheeks. "Do you love her? I just met her." "But you're gonna marry her." "Maybe, eventually, if she wants to." "And then what happens to Mama?" Josie's voice cracked. "Does everyone just forget she existed?" Tom crossed the distance between them and knelt in the snow so they were eye to eye. "I will never forget your Mama. Not one single day. She's in everything I am, everything I built, everything I taught you. Bringing Margaret here don't change that." "Then why do it?" "Because your Mama would want you to have a woman in your life who can teach you things I can't. Because you deserve better than a father who burns dinner and don't know how to braid hair." He touched her cheek gently. "And because I'm tired of being alone." Josie's face crumpled. She threw herself at him, sobbing into his shoulder. Tom held her tight, feeling her small body shake with grief that was 3 years old and still raw as yesterday. "I miss her," Josie whispered. "Every single day." "Me too, baby. Me too." They stayed like that until her crying slowed. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her nose on her sleeve. "I don't want to like them." "You don't have to like them right away. Just give them a chance." "The little girl don't talk." "I noticed." "Why not?" Tom thought about Annie's hollow eyes, Margaret's bruises, the way they'd all flinched when the stagecoach door first opened. "I think she's been hurt. And sometimes when people get hurt bad enough, words stop being safe." Josie was quiet for a moment. "Can I go see the horses?" "Sure, but come back for midday meal." She nodded and headed toward the barn, her small figure disappearing into the shadows. Tom watched her go, then turned back toward the house. Through the window he could see Margaret clearing dishes while Annie sat at the table motionless as a doll. Samuel appeared beside him, startling him. "She always that sad?" "Most days," Tom admitted. "My aunt's sad too. Just hides it better." Tom looked at the boy. Up close he could see the resemblance, same dark hair, same strong chin. "What happened to your sister Margaret's sister, I mean?" Samuel's face hardened. "Her husband happened. Beat her till she couldn't get out of bed. Then one night he hit her wrong and she just didn't wake up. Left Annie behind, and the law said the husband still had rights to her even though he'd killed her mama." Tom's blood went cold. "Margaret took the girl. Stole her according to the law. That's why we left. Why we kept moving. He's got men looking for us." Samuel met his eyes. "You should know that. We bring danger with us." "How close are they?" "Don't know. We've been running 6 months. Lost them in St. Louis, we thought. But men like that don't quit." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That changes nothing. You might get hurt. Your daughter might." "I said it changes nothing." Tom's voice was iron. "Any man shows up here looking to hurt women and children, he'll find out what Montana justice looks like." Samuel stared at him. Why do you care?" "Because I got a daughter. Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love. Because letting you get dragged back to face that bastard would make me complicit in whatever he does next." Tom's jaw set. "And because standing by while people get hurt ain't what men do. It's what cowards do." Something shifted in Samuel's eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the foundation of it, the possibility. "I can work," he said quietly. "I'm strong. I can earn my keep." "I know you can." Tom gestured toward the barn. "Come on, let's get started." They worked through the morning mucking stalls, repairing fence rails damaged by snow chopping wood for the fire. Samuel worked with a desperate intensity, like he was trying to prove something. Tom led him, understanding that sometimes pride needs to be satisfied before it can be set aside. Around noon, Margaret appeared in the barn door with a basket. "I brought food." Samuel looked up from the fence rail he was sanding. "We ain't done yet." "You're done enough to eat." She set the basket on a hay bale. "Bread and cheese, and apples from the root cellar." Tom wiped sweat from his forehead, despite the cold. "Appreciate it." She nodded, then hesitated. "Josephine is in the house with Annie. I asked if she wanted to help me bake, but she said she'd rather teach Annie to play cards." Tom raised his eyebrows. "That's progress." "Or pity." But Margaret smiled slightly. "Either way, Annie's sitting up straighter than I've seen in months. There's something about your daughter, she's fierce, but Annie responds to that." "Josie's got her mama's fire," Tom said. "Sometimes I'm grateful for it. Other times I'm terrified of it." Margaret laughed softly. It was the first real laugh he'd heard from her. "She'll be formidable when she grows up." "She already is." They ate together, the three of them, sitting on hay bales in the barn, while snow fell gently outside. Samuel wolfed down his food, then went back to work without being asked. Margaret stayed. "He likes you," she said quietly, watching her brother. "He tolerates me." For Samuel, that's the same thing. She picked at her bread. "He hasn't trusted anyone since our father died. That was 5 years ago. Our mother was already gone. We had nobody." "What happened?" "Cholera took Mama when I was 16. Papa tried to keep us together, but the farm failed. He died from working himself to death trying to save it." Her voice was matter-of-fact, like she'd told this story too many times to cry over it anymore. "After that, we bounced between relatives who didn't want us. I took work where I could find it. Then my sister married a man we thought would take care of her. But he didn't." "No." Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. "He took everything. Her money, her hope, her life. And then he wanted Annie. Wanted to own her like he'd owned her mother." "So you ran." "So I ran. Took Samuel and Annie in the middle of the night and didn't look back. Used every penny I had to stay ahead of him." She looked up at Tom. "When I saw your ad, I thought it was a miracle, a chance to disappear into Montana where he'd never find us. I thought if I could just get here, just get Annie somewhere safe." "She'll be safe here," Tom said. "You can't promise that." "I can try." Margaret studied his face for a long moment. "Why are you like this? Most men I've met are—" She trailed off. "Cruel. Selfish. Small. Willing to hurt people weaker than them because it makes them feel strong." She shook her head. "But you're not like that. I'm just a man who lost his wife and knows what it feels like when the world stops caring if you live or die." Tom stood up, brushing crumbs from his pants. "Ain't nothing special about that. Just human." "That's where you're wrong," Margaret said softly. "Being human in a world this hard, that's the most special thing there is." Their eyes met. Held. Something passed between them, fragile and new and terrifying in its possibility. Then Samuel dropped a hammer and the spell broke. "I should get back," Margaret said, standing quickly. "The girls will be wondering where I am." She left the barn, her footsteps crunching through snow. Tom watched her go, feeling something in his chest that he hadn't felt since Anna died. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, of the first green shoots pushing through frozen ground. Samuel came over, wiping his hands on his pants. "You like her?" It wasn't a question. Tom didn't answer. "Good," Samuel said. "She deserves someone who don't hit." "I won't. I'll kill you if you do." Tom looked at the boy, really looked at him, saw the protectiveness there, the fierce love masked as anger, the desperation to keep his family safe after failing to protect his sister. "If I ever raise a hand to Margaret or Annie, or even you," Tom said quietly, "I give you permission to kill me. That's a promise." Samuel nodded slowly. "All right then." They went back to work. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside the house, Two little girls sat at a table playing cards, building something neither of them had names for yet. And somewhere on the horizon, storm clouds gathered. Not from weather, but from the past catching up. From men who claimed ownership of things that should never be owned. From violence, wearing the mask of righteousness. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. And that was enough. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. On the fourth morning, Tom was in the barn sharpening an axe when he heard horses. Not the lazy plod of a neighbor's mare, but the purposeful rhythm of men who knew where they were going and didn't care who heard them coming. He set down the whetstone and moved to the barn door, his hand instinctively checking for the rifle he kept mounted on the wall. Two riders came up the road, their horses breathing steam in the cold air. The first man was older, maybe 50, with a sheriff's badge catching the winter sunlight. The second was younger, harder, with eyes that swept the property like he was taking inventory of everything he might want to destroy. Tom stepped out into the yard. Behind him, he heard the house door open. Margaret appeared on the porch, her face draining of color. "Mr. Brennan." The sheriff dismounted, brushing snow from his coat. "Sheriff Coleman from Deer Lodge. This here's Deputy Hayes." "Sheriff?" Tom didn't offer his hand. "What brings you up the mountain?" "Looking for someone. Woman named Margaret Holloway, traveling with 2 children." Coleman pulled a paper from his coat. "Got a warrant here for kidnapping. Says she took a child that wasn't hers from Kansas. Man filing the complaint is the legal guardian girl's father." Tom's jaw tightened. "That's so?" "It is." The deputy's voice was sharp, eager. "We got word she might have come this way. Bought passage to Montana Territory. You seen her?" "Might have." Coleman's eyes narrowed. "That ain't an answer." "It's the only one you're getting till I see that warrant." The sheriff handed over the paper. Tom read it slowly, his face giving nothing away. The words were legal and official, and completely one-sided. Margaret's name. Annie's name. Charges of abduction, violation of custody, theft. The signature at the bottom belonged to a man named Robert Holloway. "This says the girl's name is Holloway," Tom said carefully. "Same as the woman you're looking for." "The father's brother," Coleman explained. "He married Margaret's sister. When the sister died, custody went to him by law. Margaret took the girl without permission." "And why'd she do that?" The deputy spat in the snow. "Don't matter why. Law's the law." "It matters to me." Tom handed the warrant back. "Man beats his wife to death, I reckon that changes things." Coleman's expression shifted slightly. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." Margaret's voice rang out from the porch. She stepped forward, Samuel and Josie appearing behind her. Annie was nowhere to be seen. "Robert killed my sister. Everyone in town knew it. But he had money and friends, and she was just a woman who talked back." "Ma'am," Coleman started. "Don't ma'am me. He broke her ribs. He blackened her eyes. He made her beg for food." Margaret's voice shook but didn't break. "And when she finally couldn't take any more, when she tried to fight back, he beat her so hard she never woke up. The doctor said it was fever, but I saw the bruises. I knew. That still don't give you the right. I had every right." Margaret descended the porch steps, her hands clenched into fists. "Annie's 5 years old. She watched her mother die. You think I was going to let that monster have her? Let him do to her what he did to my sister?" The deputy's hand moved toward his gun. Tom stepped between them. "Easy," he said quietly. "She's wanted," Hayes said. "We got a job to do." "Then do it legal." Tom's voice was cold. "That warrant says you're looking for her. You found her. Now what?" Coleman shifted his weight. "Now we take her back to Kansas. There'll be a hearing. Judge'll sort it out. And the girl goes back to her father till the law decides otherwise." "No." The word came from Samuel, who jumped off the porch and was moving toward the deputy with violence in his eyes. "You ain't taking them anywhere." "Boy!" Hayes reached for his gun. Tom caught Samuel's arm, stopping him. "Don't." "They're gonna hurt her," Samuel growled. "They're gonna give Annie back to that bastard." "I know." Tom's grip was iron. "But this ain't the way." "Then what is?" Tom looked at the sheriff. "How long do I have?" "For what way? To make this right. Legal-like." Coleman frowned. "This ain't your fight, Mr. Brennan." "It is now." Tom released Samuel and faced the lawman squarely. "Margaret Holloway came here under contract to be my wife. That makes her family. That makes this my business. Contract don't mean nothing against a warrant." "Maybe not, but Montana law says a man can speak for his household. Says I got rights when it comes to protecting people under my roof." Tom's voice was steady. "So I'm asking how long before you have to take her in?" The sheriff and deputy exchanged looks. Finally, Coleman sighed. "Warrants dated 2 weeks ago. Took us this long to track her here. I could give you 3 days to get your affairs in order. But after that she comes in voluntary," Tom said, "to Deer Lodge, for a proper hearing with a proper judge. And if she runs, she won't." Margaret made a sound like she'd been hit. "Tom, trust me." He didn't look at her, kept his eyes on Coleman. 3 days. You got my word she'll be there." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 3 days. But if she ain't there, I'm coming back with more men and less patience." "Understood." Coleman and Hayes mounted up. As they turned their horses, the deputy called back, "You're making a mistake, Brennan. Woman like that ain't worth trouble." Tom watched them ride away until they disappeared into the trees. Then he turned to face Margaret, whose face was streaked with tears. "You gave me to them," she whispered. "I bought you time." "Time for what?" "So I can walk into that hearing and watch them hand Annie over to a killer." Her voice rose. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly." Tom's voice was hard. "You run now, you're guilty. You run now, every lawman from here to Kansas comes hunting. But you walk in there with your head up and tell the truth. The truth don't matter, not to men like that. Then we make it matter." Tom moved closer. "Margaret, listen to me. You got 3 days to find proof. 3 days to get testimony. 3 days to build a case that even a Kansas judge can't ignore." "There is no proof. Everyone in town was too scared to speak up." "Then we find someone who ain't scared." Tom looked at Samuel. "You know anyone? Anyone who saw what he did? Anyone willing to talk?" Samuel's face was thoughtful. "Maybe. There was a doctor, old man named Peters. He treated my sister after the worst times. Wrote it down in his book." "Where is he now?" "Still in Kansas, far as I know. But he won't come. He's got to practice a family." "Everyone's got something to lose," Tom said. "Question is whether they're willing to lose it for what's right." He turned to Margaret. "Write him a letter. Tonight. Tell him what's happening. Tell him a little girl's life depends on him finding his courage. And if he says no, then we find another way." Tom's jaw set. "I ain't letting them take Annie. Not without a fight." Margaret stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Then she crossed the distance between them and threw her arms around him, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had stopped making sense. "Thank you," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Thank you." Tom held her, carefully aware of Samuel and Josie watching, aware of how fragile this moment was. "Don't thank me yet. We got a lot of work ahead." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Why are you doing this? You barely know us." "I know enough." Tom's voice was quiet. "And I made a promise. Said you'd be safe here. Aim to keep it." Josie spoke for the first time. "They'll hurt you too. Those men. If you fight them." "Maybe." "Papa. Josephine." Tom turned to his daughter. "Your mama once told me that a man who won't stand up for what's right ain't much of a man at all. I believed her then. I believe her now." Josie's eyes were huge. "But what if they take you away too?" They won't. You can't promise that. You're right. I can't. Tom knelt in front of her. But I can promise that I'll try my hardest to come back. And I can promise that some things are worth the risk. Josie looked past him at Margaret, at Samuel, at the house where Annie was hiding. She really in danger? The little girl. Yes. From her own father. From the man who killed her mother. Josie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Mama would have helped too. I know. Then I guess we have to. Tom pulled her into a hug. Over her head, he saw Margaret watching them with an expression he couldn't name. Gratitude mixed with sorrow, mixed with something that looked dangerously close to hope. Samuel cleared his throat. What do you need me to do? Help me figure out who else might testify. Neighbors, shopkeepers, anyone who saw something. Tom stood up. And we need to get Margaret ready for that hearing. She's got to tell her story right. Clear, strong, no breaking down. I can do that, Margaret said, though her voice shook. I know you can. Tom looked at each of them in turn. We got 3 days, that's it. 3 days to save a little girl's life. So we don't sleep much, we don't waste time, and we don't give up. Agreed? Agreed, Samuel said immediately. Josie nodded. Agreed. Margaret took a shaky breath. Agreed. Good. Tom started toward the house. Let's get to work. That night, the house blazed with lamplight long after dark. Margaret sat at the table writing letter after letter to the doctor, to former neighbors, to anyone who might have witnessed Robert Holloway's violence. Her hand cramped, but she kept going, the scratch of pen on paper filling the silence. Samuel sat with a list of names, marking off ones he remembered, adding others as memory surfaced. Josie had taken Annie up to the loft, and through the floorboards, they could hear her reading stories in a soft voice, trying to distract the child from the fear that filled every corner. Tom stood at the window, watching the darkness, thinking about the 3 days ahead, and all the ways this could go wrong. He thought about Coleman's face, about the deputy's eagerness to use his gun, about Kansas judges, who valued property rights over human lives. Tom. Margaret's voice was small. He turned. She was looking at him with exhaustion in every line of her body. What if this don't work? She asked. What if we do everything right and they still take her? Tom crossed the room and sat down across from her. Then we don't let them. You mean run? I mean we do whatever it takes. His voice was low, meant for her ears only. I ain't a violent man, Margaret. But I ain't a man who stands by while children get hurt either. If that judge rules wrong, if they try to take Annie by force, they'll arrest you. Maybe. You could lose everything. The ranch, your daughter. Or I could lose my self-respect by doing nothing. That's worse. Tom reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Whatever happens, you ain't alone in this. Remember that. Margaret looked down at their joined hands. I don't understand you. Nothing to understand. I'm just a man who's tired of watching bad things happen to good people. No. She shook her head. You're more than that. You're the first person in my whole life who saw me struggling and didn't look away. Who saw I was drowning and threw me a rope instead of pushing me under. Her voice cracked. You're good, Tom. Actually good. And I'm terrified that helping me is going to destroy you. Then don't be terrified. Be determined. Tom squeezed her hand gently. We got 3 days. Let's use them. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Okay. Okay. They worked until midnight. When the letters were finished, Tom saddled his horse and rode through the dark to the nearest settlement, a trading post 8 miles south. The owner was an old friend named Dutch, who asked no questions when Tom handed him a stack of letters and enough money for fast delivery. These urgent? Dutch asked. Life or death? I'll send them first light. Appreciate it. Tom rode home through darkness so complete the stars felt close enough to touch. When he got back, the house was finally quiet. He checked on the horses, fed the fire in the stove, and stood for a moment in the main room where everyone was sleeping. Margaret had given up his bed to the children. She'd made a pallet near the fire for herself, but she was awake when he came in, her eyes reflecting lamplight. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Too afraid." "Of what?" "That I'll wake up and this'll all be gone. That you'll have changed your mind. That—" She stopped, pressing her hand over her mouth. Tom sat down on the floor beside her pallet. "I ain't changing my mind." "You say that now." "I'll say it tomorrow too, and the day after." He leaned back against the wall. "Margaret, I know you got every reason not to trust people, but I'm asking you to try, just for these 3 days. Trust that I mean what I say." She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "What if we lose?" "Then we lose together." Tom's voice was firm. "But we ain't lost yet." Margaret rolled onto her side, facing him. In the firelight, her face looked younger, less worn. "Will you tell me about her? Your wife. What do you want to know? What you loved most?" Tom thought about it. Her laugh. It was this big, honest thing that filled up a room, made everyone around her smile. He paused. "She'd like you, I think." "How do you know?" "Because she had a soft spot for people who got knocked down but kept getting up. Said that was the only kind of strength that mattered." Tom looked at Margaret. "You keep getting up, even when it'd be easier to stay down." "I got Annie. I got Samuel. Can't stay down when they need me. That's what I mean." Tom's voice was gentle. "That's the strength Anna would have recognized." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. "I'm so tired of crying." "Then stop." Tom reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. "We got work to do. Plenty of time for crying after we win." "You really think we can—" "I think we got no choice but to try." She caught his hand before he could pull it away, holding it against her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Tom's throat tightened. "You already thanked me. I'll thank you every day for the rest of my life if this works." "Then I guess we better make it work." They stayed like that for a moment, the fire crackling between them, the future uncertain, but no longer quite so terrifying. Then Margaret released his hand, and Tom stood up, his knees protesting the movement. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we plan. What about you?" "I'll sleep when this is over." He moved toward the door, intending to bunk in the barn again, but Margaret's voice stopped him. "Tom." "Yeah." "If something happens, if this goes wrong and they come for us, promise me you'll take care of Josie first. Promise me you won't let helping us ruin her life." "Nothing's gonna ruin her life. Promise me." Tom looked back at her. "I promise. But it ain't gonna come to that." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let it." He went outside before she could argue. The cold hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking up at stars that offered no answers, only witness. 3 days. 72 hours to build a case, find testimony, and convince a judge that the law could be bent toward mercy instead of property rights. It wasn't much time. It probably wasn't enough. But it was what they had. And Tom Brennan had learned a long time ago that sometimes what you have is all you need, as long as you're willing to fight for it with everything you've got. He walked toward the barn, his footsteps crunching through fresh snow. Behind him, lamplight glowed in the house windows. Inside, 5 people who'd been strangers a week ago were sleeping under one roof, bound together by circumstance and desperation, and the fragile hope that sometimes good people win. Tom didn't know if that was true, but he knew he was going to find out. The next morning came too fast. Tom was up before dawn again, his body running on determination and coffee. He'd spent half the night working out a plan, and by the time the others woke, he had it laid out in his mind like a map. Margaret appeared first, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes shadowed with lack of sleep, but clear with purpose. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about the hearing, about what they'll ask me. And they're gonna say I'm a kidnapper, that I stole a child for selfish reasons, that I'm unfit." She poured herself coffee with shaking hands. "I need to be ready for that." "You will be." "How do you know?" "Because you're gonna practice." Tom sat down at the table. "Right now. Pretend I'm the judge. Tell me why you took Annie." Margaret's face paled. "Now. No better time." She set down her cup, wiped her hands on her skirt, and took a breath. "I took her because her father—" "Her legal guardian," Tom corrected. "That's what they'll call him." Margaret's jaw clenched. "Her legal guardian was killing her mother. I saw it happen. I watched my sister fade away, saw the bruises, heard her crying through the walls. And when she died, when he—" Her voice broke. "Don't stop," Tom said gently. "They'll try to make you stop. Don't let them." She nodded, gathering herself. "When my sister died, I knew Annie was next. Not right away, maybe, but eventually. Men like Robert, they don't just hit once. They keep hitting until there's nothing left to hit." Her hands were fists on the table. "I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't watch another person I love die because I was too scared to act." "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" "I did. I went to the sheriff. Told him everything. He said it was a domestic matter. Said Robert had rights as a husband and father. Said unless I had real proof witnesses who'd testify, there was nothing he could do." Margaret's voice hardened. "So I made a choice. I chose Annie's life over the law." Tom leaned back. "That's good. That's real good. But they're gonna ask why you ran. Why you didn't stay and fight legal-like. Because the law protects men like Robert. It always has." Margaret met his eyes. "I'm a woman with no money, no property, no power. He's a man with all three. Who do you think the law sides with? The law's supposed to be blind. But it ain't, and you know it." Tom nodded slowly. "You're right. I do." He stood up. "Keep that fire. Keep that certainty. Walk into that hearing and make them see what you see, that protecting Annie ain't a crime. It's the most human thing you could have done. And if they don't see it, then we move to Plan B, which is still working on it." Samuel came down from the loft, Josie and Annie trailing behind him. The little girl was holding Josie's hand, which was progress neither adult commented on, but both noticed. "I remembered something," Samuel said. "About the doctor, Peters. He's got a daughter. She married a merchant in Great Falls. If we could find her, convince her to wire him." "That's good thinking." Tom grabbed his coat. "You know her married name, Collins. Jenny Collins." "Then I'm writing to Great Falls." Tom looked at Margaret. "You keep writing letters. Send more if you think of anyone. And keep practicing your testimony." "How long will you be gone?" "Back by nightfall if the roads are clear." He turned to Samuel. "You're in charge while I'm away. Anything happens, anything feels wrong, you fire 3 shots into the air. I'll hear it." Samuel straightened. "Yes, sir." Tom almost smiled at the sir. Almost. Then he was out the door and mounting his horse, riding hard toward a town 30 miles away with nothing but hope and stubbornness to guide him. Great Falls was bigger than Tom liked. Too many people, too much noise, too easy to get lost in the crowd. But it meant anonymity too, which helped when you were asking questions about people who might not want to be found. He found Jenny Collins at her husband's general store, a woman in her 30s, with her father's kind eyes and her mother's stern mouth. When Tom explained why he'd come, her face closed up like a door slamming shut. "I can't help you," she said immediately. "Can't or won't. Both." She busied herself arranging canned goods on a shelf. "What happened to that family is tragic, but my father can't get involved. He's got too much to lose." "A little girl's got more to lose." "That's not my problem." Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice. You know what Robert Holloway did. Your father treated his wife. He saw the injuries. He knows the truth. Knowing and proving are different things. Then let him prove it. Let him testify." Jenny's hands stilled. "And when Robert comes after him, when he ruins his practice, drives away, his patience makes his life hell, what then? Then your father gets to look in the mirror and know he did the right thing." "The right thing," she laughed bitterly. "The right thing gets you killed in towns like that. It gets your family hurt. It gets—" She stopped, turning to face him fully. "Who are you, really? Why do you care so much about people you don't even know?" Tom met her gaze steadily. "Because once upon a time my wife died and I couldn't save her. Couldn't do a damn thing except watch her slip away. And I swore to God and to myself that if I ever got another chance to save someone, I wouldn't waste it." His voice was rough with emotion. "This is my chance. Don't take it from me." Jenny's eyes filled with tears. "My father's 70 years old. He can't fight anymore." "He don't have to fight, just has to tell the truth." Tom pulled out a piece of paper. "This is where the hearing is, Deer Lodge Courthouse 2 days from now. If he shows up, if he testifies, Margaret's got a real shot. Annie's got a real shot. And if he don't, then a 5-year-old girl goes back to the man who killed her mother." Tom pressed the paper into her hand. "That's what your father's silence costs." He turned and walked out before she could answer, before she could hand the paper back, before he could see whether his words had landed or bounced off armor built from years of self-preservation. The ride home felt longer. Tom pushed his horse hard, racing against daylight and doubt. When he finally crested the ridge overlooking his ranch, the sun was setting, and his body ached from cold and exhaustion. But the house was still standing. Smoke rose from the chimney. No shots had been fired into the air. They were safe. For now. He dismounted in the yard and stood for a moment just breathing, just being grateful. Then the door opened, and Margaret was there, backlit by lamplight, her face anxious. "Did you find her?" "I found her. And I don't know. She didn't say no, but she didn't say yes either." Tom climbed the porch steps. "We'll know tomorrow when the hearing comes." Margaret's shoulders sagged. "So we're still just hoping." "Hope's all we got." "It ain't enough. Sometimes it is." Tom touched her shoulder. "Don't give up yet. We still got time. One more day." Her voice was hollow. "One more day, and then we fight." Tom's hand tightened. "With everything we've got. I promise you, Margaret, Annie don't go back to that man, not while I'm breathing." She looked up at him, and in her eyes, he saw trust, warring with terror, hope drowning in despair. Then she pressed her face against his chest and held on tight, and Tom wrapped his arms around her because it was the only thing he could do, the only comfort he had to offer. Inside, the children were setting the table for supper. Outside, night fell across the mountain like a curtain. And somewhere between hope and fear, between law and mercy, the next day waited ready to decide the fate of 5 people who'd built something fragile and precious in the space between strangers and family. Tom closed his eyes and prayed to a God he wasn't sure was listening. "Let this work. Please, just let this work." The mountain offered no answer, only silence and stars, and the terrible weight of tomorrow. The morning of the hearing, Margaret couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She'd been awake since 3, sitting by the dying fire, running through her testimony over and over, until the words lost meaning. Tom found her there when he came in from feeding the horses, her lips moving silently, her face gray with exhaustion and fear. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "No." She looked up at him with hollow eyes. "But I don't get to be ready. I just have to go." "You'll do fine. You keep saying that. Like if you say it enough times it'll be true," her voice cracked. "But what if I freeze up there? What if I can't find the words? What if I cry and they see me as weak and—" "Margaret." Tom knelt beside her chair. "Listen to me. You are the strongest person I know. You ran 1,000 miles to save a child. You faced down your past when it would have been easier to hide. You're still breathing when most people would have given up. He caught her chin gently, making her meet his eyes. That judge is gonna see that strength, and if he don't, we'll make him see it. How? By telling the truth so clear he can't ignore it. She nodded, though tears streamed down her face. I'm terrified. I know, but you ain't alone. Tom stood offering his hand. Come on, let's get you ready. Samuel was already dressed in his only good shirt, threadbare but clean. Josie had braided Annie's hair, and the little girl looked almost normal, except for her continued silence, and the way her eyes tracked every movement like a trapped animal watching for predators. They ate a breakfast nobody tasted. Margaret tried to get Annie to eat more, but the child pushed her plate away. Her small face set in lines too old for 5 years. Finally, Margaret gave up and just held her rocking slightly, memorizing the weight of her niece in her arms in case this was the last time. We should go, Tom said. Don't want to be late. The ride to Deer Lodge took 3 hours. Tom drove the wagon with Margaret beside him. The children huddled in the back under blankets. Nobody spoke much. The only sounds were the horses' hooves, the creak of wheels, and the occasional sob Margaret couldn't quite swallow. Halfway there, they passed Sheriff Coleman and Deputy Hayes riding in the opposite direction. The lawmen tipped their hats, but their eyes were hard warning. Tom kept the wagon moving, his jaw tight. They're expecting me to run, Margaret whispered. I know. They look disappointed that I didn't. Good. Let them be disappointed. Tom's hands were steady on the reins. You're walking in there with your head up. You're showing them you got nothing to hide. Except a kidnapping charge. Except a little girl you saved from a killer. The law don't see it that way. Then we change what the law sees. Deer Lodge appeared through the trees like a threat. The town was bigger than Tom's usual haunts, with a proper courthouse and a jail, and streets full of people who stopped to stare as the wagon rolled past. Tom felt their eyes, felt their judgment, felt the weight of public opinion already turning against the woman beside him. He pulled up in front of the courthouse, a square brick building that looked more like a prison than a place of justice. A crowd had gathered on the steps, townspeople drawn by gossip lawyers looking for entertainment, and standing at the center of it all, a man Tom knew without being told was Robert Holloway. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that looked trustworthy until you saw his eyes. Those eyes were cold and calculating, sweeping over the wagon, over Margaret, over Annie, with a possessiveness that made Tom's skin crawl. That's him, Samuel breathed from the back. That's the bastard. Easy, Tom warned. I'm gonna kill him. You ain't gonna do nothing except sit in that courtroom and watch me handle this. Tom turned to look at the boy. You understand, you make a scene, you hurt our case. Margaret needs you calm. Samuel's fists were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white, but he nodded. Tom climbed down and helped Margaret from the wagon. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Behind them, Josie lifted Annie down, while Samuel jumped out, his body coiled tight with barely controlled rage. Robert Holloway moved forward, his lawyer beside him, a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit who smiled like a shark. Margaret, Robert said, his voice smooth as oil. It's been a long time. Not long enough. Margaret's voice was barely audible. And you brought my daughter. Robert's eyes fixed on Annie. Hello, sweetheart. Did you miss Papa? Annie buried her face in Margaret's skirt, her small body rigid with terror. The movement was answer enough, but Robert just smiled. She's shy. That's all right. We'll have plenty of time to reacquaint ourselves. He turned to his lawyer. Mr. Patterson, I believe we're ready to proceed. The lawyer nodded. Indeed. Shall we go inside? Tom stepped forward, positioning himself between Robert and Margaret. She ain't going nowhere near him till the judge says so. Robert's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. And who might you be? Thomas Brennan. Margaret's intended. Ah, the mail-order husband. Robert's tone dripped with condescension. I heard you took in my daughter and her kidnapper. Very charitable of you. Foolish, but charitable. Foolish is letting a man who beats women have custody of a child, the crowd murmured. Robert's smile finally slipped. Careful, Mr. Brennan. Slander is a serious charge. Truth's a defense. We'll see what the judge thinks about your truth. Robert turned away. Come along, Patterson. Let's finish this. They disappeared into the courthouse. Tom took Margaret's arm, felt her shaking harder now. I can't do this, she whispered. Tom, I can't. Yes, you can. His voice was firm. You can because you have to. Because Annie needs you to. Because running now means losing everything. He looked down at her. You're stronger than him. You're stronger than all of them. Show them. She took a shuddering breath, then another, forcing steel into her spine. Okay. Okay. They climbed the courthouse steps together, Tom and Margaret in front, Samuel and Josie flanking them with Annie between. People parted to let them through, some faces sympathetic, most suspicious. By the time they reached the courtroom doors, Tom could feel dozens of eyes boring into his back. Inside the courtroom was already packed. Judge Morrison sat at his bench, a gray-haired man with eyes that gave nothing away. Robert and his lawyer occupied the plaintiff's table, looking confident and comfortable. Margaret's side was empty except for 2 chairs. 2 chairs for 5 people. Tom pulled over extra seats while the bailiff scowled. Margaret sat with Annie in her lap, the child's silence somehow louder than all the murmuring around them. Samuel and Josie sat behind their young faces, set in identical expressions of defiant protectiveness. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Court is in session. Case of Holloway versus Holloway regarding custody of minor child Annie Elizabeth Holloway. He looked at Margaret. Miss Holloway, you stand accused of kidnapping. How do you plead? Margaret stood, her legs barely supporting her. Not guilty, Your Honor. On what grounds? On the grounds that I saved her life. The courtroom erupted. Morrison banged his gavel again. Order, Mr. Patterson, present your case. Robert's lawyer stood smooth and polished. Your Honor, the facts are simple. My client, Robert Holloway, is the legal guardian and natural father of Annie Holloway. 6 months ago, the defendant absconded with the child without permission, without legal authority, and without regard for Mr. Holloway's parental rights. She has been in willful violation of the law ever since. We ask that the child be returned immediately, and that Miss Holloway face criminal charges for her actions. Miss Holloway. Morrison looked at Margaret. Your response. Margaret stood again, and this time Tom stood with her. Your Honor, may I speak on her behalf? And you are? Thomas Brennan. He hesitated. I'm her family. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Family how? She came west to marry me. That makes her my responsibility. I see. And you're willing to speak to these charges? I'm willing to tell you what kind of man Robert Holloway is. I'm willing to tell you that Margaret didn't kidnap Annie, she rescued her from a killer. The courtroom exploded again. Patterson was on his feet shouting objections. Robert's face had gone red. Morrison's gavel rang out like gunshots. Mr. Brennan, you will refrain from slanderous accusations, or I will hold you in contempt. It ain't slander if it's true, Your Honor. Do you have proof? Working on it. Then sit down until you have it. Morrison's voice was hard. Miss Holloway, answer the question. Did you take the child without Mr. Holloway's permission? Margaret's voice was stronger now, fueled by Tom's presence beside her. I did. Then by law you are guilty of kidnapping. By law maybe, but by God and conscience I'm guilty of nothing except caring whether a child lives or dies. Margaret's hands were shaking, but her voice didn't break. My sister married that man. She thought she was getting a husband. Instead, she got a monster who beat her for 6 years, who broke her bones and her spirit, who killed her when she finally tried to fight back. That's a lie. Robert was on his feet. Your Honor, She's making wild accusations. Sit down, Mr. Holloway. Morrison's eyes were on Margaret now. Continue. I saw the bruises. I heard her crying. I begged her to leave, but she was too scared, and by the time she found courage, it was too late. Margaret's voice cracked. When she died, I knew Annie was next. I'd watched my sister die from that man's fists. I wasn't going to watch my niece die too, so I took her. I ran, and I'd do it again. The courtroom was silent now. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Margaret's face. Those are serious accusations. Do you have witnesses, medical records? Anything beyond your word? I have the truth. The truth, Miss Holloway, requires evidence. Morrison looked at Patterson. Does your client have anything to say to these charges? Robert stood, and Tom saw the mask slide perfectly into place. The wounded father, the grieving husband, the misunderstood man. Your Honor, my wife's death was tragic. She fell ill with fever and died despite my best efforts to save her. As for these accusations of violence, he shook his head sadly. My sister-in-law has always been unstable, prone to wild imaginings. I believe she's confused her own trauma with events that never happened. Liar, Samuel hissed from behind. Tom shot him a warning look. Morrison frowned. You're saying there was no abuse? None whatsoever. I loved my wife. I love my daughter. All I want is to take Annie home where she belongs. She belongs with me, Margaret said desperately. Your Honor, please, if you give her back to him. If I give her back to her legal father, you mean? Morrison's voice was gentler now, but no less firm. Miss Holloway, I understand your concern, but the law is clear. Without evidence of abuse, Mr. Holloway's parental rights are absolute. What about her fear? Tom stood again. That child hasn't spoken in 6 months. She won't look at him. She hides when he gets close. Ain't that evidence? It's evidence of trauma from being taken from her home. Patterson interjected smoothly. Children often regress when their routines are disrupted. Or when they're terrorized by men who kill their mothers. Tom's voice was hard. Morrison banged his gavel. Mr. Brennan, one more outburst and you're removed from this courtroom. Is that clear? Crystal? Good. Now. The courtroom doors banged open. Every head turned. An old man stood in the doorway, breathing hard like he'd been running. He wore a dusty traveling coat and carried a medical bag. Dr. Peters? Margaret's voice was a strangled whisper. The old man nodded. Behind him, a younger woman appeared, Jenny Collins, her face set with determination. Morrison frowned. Who are you? Dr. Edmund Peters, Your Honor. From Wichita, Kansas. The doctor moved down the aisle, his steps slow but purposeful. I've come to testify regarding the death of Sarah Holloway and the abuse she suffered at her husband's hands. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Patterson was shouting objections. Robert had gone pale. Morrison's gavel rang out again and again until finally the noise subsided. Dr. Peters, Morrison said carefully, you have evidence. I have medical records documenting every injury Sarah Holloway sustained over 6 years of marriage. Broken ribs, fractured wrist, concussion, bruises consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. The doctor opened his bag and pulled out a leather journal. I recorded every visit, every injury, every time she told me she fell or walked into a door or made up some excuse to explain away what we both knew was happening. Those records are private, Patterson said quickly. Inadmissible. They're the truth, Peters shot back. And I'm tired of hiding it. Tired of watching men like Robert Holloway destroy lives while good people look away because it's easier. He looked at Morrison. You want evidence. Here it is. 6 years of documented abuse. And on the last page, the notes from the day Sarah died, notes that clearly state her injuries were inconsistent with fever and entirely consistent with being beaten to death. Morrison took the journal, reading in heavy silence. The courtroom waited. Margaret was crying openly now, Tom's arm around her shoulders. Annie's face was pressed into Margaret's chest, her small body trembling. Robert's lawyer was whispering frantically in his client's ear. Robert himself sat frozen, his mask finally cracking. Finally, Morrison looked up. "Mr. Holloway, do you have anything to say about these records? They're lies." But Robert's voice lacked conviction now. "That doctor was always biased against me. These are dated medical records with detailed descriptions of injuries." Morrison's voice was cold. "Unless you're suggesting Dr. Peters fabricated 6 years of documentation on the chance he might need it someday, I suggest you choose your next words carefully." Robert said nothing. His lawyer started to speak, but Morrison cut him off with a look. "I've heard enough," the judge said. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm ruling in favor of Miss Holloway. Custody of Annie Holloway is hereby granted to Margaret Holloway with the stipulation that Mr. Robert Holloway has no visitation rights pending further investigation into his late wife's death." He banged his gavel. "Furthermore, I'm ordering the sheriff to detain Mr. Holloway for questioning regarding possible murder charges." The courtroom exploded. Robert lunged toward Margaret, but Tom was faster, putting himself between them. Samuel was on his feet, ready to fight. Sheriff Coleman and his deputy moved in, grabbing Robert's arms. "You can't do this," Robert screamed. "She's my daughter, mine." "She's a child who deserves to live without fear," Morrison said flatly. "Remove him." They dragged Robert out, his protests echoing through the courthouse. Patterson gathered his papers in angry silence and stalked out. The crowd began to disperse, voices raised in excited discussion. Margaret collapsed into her chair, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Annie climbed into her lap, and for the first time in 6 months, the little girl made a sound, a small broken sob that turned into the word "Mama." Margaret froze. "What?" "Mama." Annie's voice was hoarse from disuse. "Don't leave me. Never." Margaret crushed her close. "Never, baby. I promise. Never." Tom stood there watching them, feeling something crack open in his chest. Behind him, Samuel was shaking, tears streaming down his face. Josie had pressed her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Dr. Peters approached, leaning heavily on his cane. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." "You came when it mattered," Margaret said through tears. "That's enough. My daughter convinced me. Said a man who won't stand up for truth ain't much of a man at all." He smiled slightly. "Reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place." Jenny Collins stood beside him, her own eyes wet. "I'm glad we made it in time." "So are we." Tom offered his hand to the old doctor. "Thank you. You saved more than one life today." "Just did what should have been done 6 years ago." Peters looked at Annie, who was clinging to Margaret like she might disappear. "That child deserves better than what she's had. You make sure she gets it." "I will." Tom's voice was firm. "We all will." Morrison approached, his expression softer than before. "Miss Holloway, you'll need to file proper custody papers in Kansas, but for now, the child is yours. Don't give me reason to regret this decision." "You won't, Your Honor." Margaret could barely speak. "Thank you." He nodded and walked away. Slowly the courtroom emptied until only their small group remained, Tom and Margaret, and 3 children who'd walked in strangers and walked out as something that might, with time and patience, become a family. "We should go," Tom said quietly. "Long ride home." Home. The word landed differently now. Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them that was bigger than gratitude, deeper than relief. "Home," she repeated. "Yes." They gathered themselves and walked out into afternoon sunlight that felt warmer than it should for December. People were still gathered on the courthouse steps, staring, whispering. Tom ignored them all, helping Margaret into the wagon, lifting Annie up beside her. Samuel climbed in back, his face still wet with tears. Josie followed, then surprised everyone by taking Annie's hand. "You can sit with me if you want," Josie said quietly. "I know what it's like to lose a mama." Annie looked at her with those two old eyes, then nodded. She moved to sit between Josie and Samuel, and just like that, the children formed their own circle of protection. Tom took up the reins, Margaret beside him. As they pulled away from the courthouse, she reached over and took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "Thank the doctor. He's the one who showed up. He showed up because you rode to Great Falls and convinced his daughter that some fights are worth having. He showed up because you made people believe that standing up for what's right matters." She squeezed his hand. "You did that, Tom. You saved us." "We saved each other," Tom said. "That's what families do." "Is that what we are, family?" Tom looked at her, at this woman who'd traveled 1,000 miles on hope and desperation, who'd stood in that courtroom and faced down her demons, who'd held on to Annie through 6 months of running and hiding and fear. He thought about his empty house, his lonely dinners, his daughter growing up without softness or laughter. He thought about Anna, who'd once told him that family wasn't about blood, but about choosing each other every single day. "Yeah," he said. "I reckon we are." Margaret smiled, and this time it reached her eyes real and bright and hopeful. Behind them, the children were talking quietly, their voices blending together. Annie's hoarse whisper, Josie's patient responses, Samuel's protective interjections. The wagon rolled through town, past staring faces, and whispered gossip out onto the mountain road, where the trees closed in and the world became simple again. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch painting, the snow gold and pink. Tom pulled up in front of the house and sat for a moment just looking at it. 3 days ago, it had been a building full of strangers. Now it was something else, something worth fighting for. "Come on," he said. "Let's get inside before we freeze." They climbed down, tired and emotionally wrung out, but somehow lighter than before. Margaret carried Annie, who was falling asleep, against her shoulder. Samuel and Josie walked ahead, arguing about who got to tell the horses what had happened. Tom unhitched the wagon while Margaret took the children inside. By the time he'd finished with the horses and made his way to the house, lamplight glowed warm in the windows, and he could smell coffee brewing. He stood on the porch for just a moment, listening to voices inside Margaret's soft instructions. Samuel's laugh, Josie's protest, Annie's tentative response. The sounds of life. The sounds of home. Tom Brennan, widower and rancher man, who'd been sure his heart had died with his wife, felt something shift inside him. Not replacement, not forgetting, but room. Room for more love, more life, more chances to get it right. He opened the door and stepped inside into warmth and noise, and the complicated, beautiful mess of family that chooses itself. The mountain wind blew cold outside, but inside the fire burned bright. And for the first time in 3 years, Thomas Brennan wasn't alone. None of them were. That night, nobody wanted to sleep alone. Margaret made pallets by the fire for all 3 children, and they huddled together like puppies seeking warmth and reassurance. Annie had spoken exactly 4 words since the courthouse. Mama, don't, leave, and me. But she'd held Margaret's hand through dinner and hadn't let go, even when her eyes started closing. Tom sat at the table with Margaret after the children finally drifted off. Both of them nursing coffee they didn't really want, but needed something to do with their hands. "I keep thinking I'm gonna wake up," Margaret whispered. "That this whole day was just a dream and I'm still running." "It's real." Tom's voice was quiet. "You're safe. She's safe. It's over." "Is it?" Margaret looked toward the children. "Robert's in jail now, but men like him don't stay locked up forever. And when he gets out, if he gets out, he's got murder charges waiting. That doctor's testimony, those records, they ain't gonna let him walk free. You don't know that. You don't know how many times I've watched powerful men walk away from things that should have destroyed them." Her hands trembled around her cup. "I'm terrified this is just the beginning. That he'll come back with lawyers and money and—" "Margaret." Tom reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow. Today was a victory. Let yourself feel that. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. I don't know how to stop being afraid. Been afraid so long, it's just part of me now. Then we'll work on it together. One day at a time. One moment at a time. Tom's thumb traced small circles on her wrist. You ain't gotta be brave every second. You're allowed to fall apart now. Margaret's face crumpled. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, but couldn't stop the sob that escaped. Tom stood and pulled her up, gathering her into his arms while she cried against his chest. Deep, wrenching sobs that had been building for 6 months of running and hiding and terror. He held her through it, one hand, stroking her hair, murmuring things that weren't quite words but felt like comfort anyway. When she finally quieted, she stayed there in his arms, her breathing uneven but calmer. I'm sorry, she whispered. Nothing to be sorry for. I'm a mess. You're human. Tom pulled back enough to see her face. And you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Don't apologize for having feelings. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen but searching. Why are you so good to me? Because you deserve good. That's not an answer. Tom was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When Anna died, I closed up. Shut down everything except what I needed to survive and raise Josie. I stopped feeling much of anything. Then you showed up on that stagecoach, you and 2 children. I didn't ask for, carrying more pain than any person should have to carry, and something in me woke back up. He touched her cheek gently. You reminded me what it feels like to care about something bigger than my own hurt, to fight for something that matters, to be part of something that ain't just survival, but actual living. Tom, her voice broke on his name. I ain't asking for nothing, he said quickly. I know you came here out of desperation, not choice. I know the contract we had was business, not... He stopped, uncertain how to finish. Not what? Margaret's hand came up to cover his where it rested against her face. Not love. The word hung between them, fragile and enormous. Didn't want to presume, Tom said. What if I wanted you to presume? Her eyes were locked on his now. What if somewhere between that stagecoach and that courtroom, this stopped being about desperation and started being about... She swallowed hard. About something else. Tom's heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. What kind of something else? The kind where I look at you and feel safe. Where I think about the future, and it don't just look like running anymore. Where I imagine waking up next to you every morning, and that don't scare me, it makes me happy. Margaret's voice was shaking, but steady. The kind where maybe I didn't come here just to escape. Maybe I came here to find home. Tom stared at her, hardly daring to breathe. You mean that? I'm terrified that I mean it. That I'm falling for you after knowing you barely a week. That this is too fast and too much and... He kissed her. Gentle and careful, and full of all the things he didn't have words for. She made a small sound of surprise, then melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. That was... Margaret started. Too much? Tom asked. Suddenly worried he'd pushed too far. Not enough. She smiled through fresh tears. Definitely not enough. He kissed her again, slower this time, and she kissed him back like she was trying to prove something, that this was real, that she was here. That hope wasn't something that only existed in dreams. From the floor by the fire, Josie's voice cut through the moment. If you two are done kissing, Annie just had a nightmare. They broke apart fast, both of them flushed. Josie was sitting up. Annie curled in her lap, the little girl's face wet with tears. I'm sorry. Margaret hurried over. Baby, I'm right here. Bad man, Annie whispered. Bad man coming. No, sweetheart. The bad man's locked up. He can't hurt you anymore. Promise? I promise. Margaret gathered Annie into her arms. You're safe now. We all are. Annie clung to her, her small body still trembling. Josie watched with an expression that was part sympathy, part something older and more complicated. "I used to have nightmares about Mama," Josie said quietly. "After she died, every night for months." "What made them stop?" Margaret asked. "They didn't, not really. I just learned to remember that the bad stuff already happened. Can't happen twice." Josie looked at Annie. "Your mama's gone, but you're still here. That means you won. The bad man didn't get you. You got away." Annie stared at Josie with those two wise eyes. "You won too." "Yeah, still winning every day I wake up." Josie's voice was fierce. "So are you." It was the most Tom had heard his daughter say to the newcomers, without anger in her voice. Margaret seemed to notice it too, her eyes filling with gratitude. "Thank you," Margaret said softly, "for being kind to her." Josie shrugged, embarrassed by the attention. "She's just a kid. Ain't her fault she got dealt a bad hand." "None of us asked for bad hands," Samuel said from his pallet. He'd been so quiet Tom had assumed he was asleep. "But we're stuck with them anyway. Might as well play them best we can." "When'd you get so wise?" Tom asked. "When I realized being angry all the time was more exhausting than just accepting help when it's offered." Samuel sat up, his hair sticking out at odd angles. "I'm sorry, by the way, for how I acted when we first got here, for treating you like an enemy when you were trying to be family. You were protecting your aunt and cousin. Ain't nothing to apologize for." Tom met the boy's eyes. "But I appreciate hearing it anyway. You really meant it, didn't you? When you said we were family. I don't say things I don't mean." Samuel nodded slowly. "My father used to say that a man's only as good as his word. That once you break it, nobody'll trust you again." Your father was right. He was right about a lot of things, just didn't live long enough to see me understand them. Samuel lay back down, pulling his blanket up. "I think he would have liked you." The words settled over the room like a blessing. Margaret was crying again, but quietly now, rocking Annie while Josie sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Tom stood by the table watching them, feeling something slot into place inside him, some piece that had been missing since Anna died. This wasn't the family he'd planned, wasn't even the family he'd asked for, but it was the family he'd gotten, and maybe that was exactly how it was supposed to work. The next morning brought news from town. Dutch rode up on his old mare just after breakfast, his face grim. "Thought you should know," he said when Tom met him in the yard. "Robert Holloway made bail." Tom's blood went cold. "What?" "Posted bond this morning. Some lawyer friend from Kansas wired the money. Judge Morrison's madder than hell about it, but his hands are tied. The man's legally free until trial." "Where is he now?" "Left Deer Lodge heading east. Sheriff Coleman's keeping an eye on him but can't stop him from traveling." Dutch shifted in his saddle. "Tom, if he comes this way, he won't get near this house." Tom's voice was flat and hard. "I'll make sure of that." "I know you will. Just wanted you warned." Dutch tipped his hat. "You need anything, send word." After he rode off, Tom stood in the yard, trying to decide how much to tell Margaret. She'd just started sleeping without nightmares. Just started believing they were safe. This news would shatter that fragile peace. But lying would be worse. He found her in the kitchen teaching Annie how to measure flour. The sight of them together, Margaret's patient hands guiding Annie's small ones, both of them dusted with white powder, both of them smiling, made his chest ache. "Margaret, need to talk to you. Private." Her smile faded. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him outside, leaving Annie with Josie. "What's wrong?" "Robert made bail." The color drained from her face. "No. He's out. Heading east last anyone saw, but he's coming here." Margaret's voice was hollow. "He's not going to let this go. He'll come for Annie." "Not if I can help it." "You can't fight the law, Tom. He's got rights now. Bail means he's a free man until trial, and that could be months from now. Months where he can hire lawyers, find witnesses, build a case to take her back." Margaret was shaking. "We have to run. We have to pack up and leave before..." No! Tom caught her shoulders. We ain't running. We just won a legal battle. We got a judge on our side and a doctor who testified against him. Running now makes us look guilty. I don't care how we look, I care about keeping Annie alive. And I care about keeping all of you alive, including you. Tom's grip tightened. You run now. Every lawman in 3 territories comes hunting. You run now, you lose any legal protection we just fought for. You run now. Annie grows up looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. Better than growing up dead. Is it? Is spending every day afraid better than standing and fighting? Margaret jerked away from him. Easy for you to say. You ain't the one he wants. You ain't the one he's gonna destroy to get what he wants. You're right. I ain't the target. Tom's voice was quiet but steel underneath. But I'm standing between you and him anyway. So if he wants to destroy someone, he's got to go through me first. That's what I'm afraid of. Margaret's face crumpled. I can't lose you too. I can't watch another person I care about get hurt because of me. Then don't watch. Help me. Tom stepped closer. We fortify this place. We stay alert. We make it clear that anyone who comes here looking to hurt people finds themselves dealing with more than they bargained for. You mean you want to fight him? I mean I want to be ready if he decides fighting's his only option. Tom's jaw set. I ain't letting that man take Annie. And I ain't letting him hurt you. Whatever it takes. Margaret stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay. We stay. We fight. Together. Together. They went back inside hand in hand. The children looked up when they entered, their faces tense with questions they were too scared to ask. Everything all right? Samuel's voice was carefully neutral. No. Tom said honestly. Robert made bail. He's out. Annie made a small sound and buried her face in Josie's shoulder. Josie's arm came around her, automatically protective and fierce. What are we gonna do? Josie asked. We're gonna be smart, and careful, and ready. Tom looked at Samuel. You know how to shoot. Some. My father taught me before he died. Then I'll teach you more, starting today. Tom turned to Josie. You too. Both you girls are gonna learn to handle a rifle. Papa, Josie started. No arguments. You need to be able to protect yourself and each other if something happens. Tom's voice was firm. I ain't trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. Margaret cleared her throat. And me. You already know how to fight. Proved that in the courtroom. Tom managed a small smile. But yeah, you're learning to shoot too. Everyone in this house knows how to defend it. They spent the day preparing. Tom brought out rifles and showed Samuel and Josie how to load, aim, and fire. Margaret picked it up faster than expected, her hands steady despite her fear. Even Annie watched from a safe distance, her eyes tracking every movement. By evening, they'd set up a system. Tom slept in shifts, keeping watch through the night. Samuel volunteered to take turns despite being young. They rigged bells on the gates and barn doors, anything that would alert them to someone approaching. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Robert didn't come. The waiting was almost worse than an actual attack. The constant vigilance, the jumping at every sound, the way Annie regressed into silence again, despite Margaret's best efforts. On the 8th day, Tom was in the barn repairing a saddle when he heard the bells. His hand went to his rifle automatically as he moved to the door. A single rider approached, but it wasn't Robert Holloway. It was Sheriff Coleman, and his face was serious. "Sheriff," Tom called. "What brings you up?" Coleman dismounted slowly. "Got news. Thought you'd want to hear it direct." Margaret appeared on the porch, her face pale. Samuel and Josie flanked her, both of them tense. "Robert Holloway's dead," Coleman said without preamble. The words hung in the air like smoke. Margaret swayed on her feet. Tom was there in 3 strides, catching her arm. "What happened?" Tom's voice was steady despite the shock coursing through him. "Tried to run. Got as far as Wyoming before a marshal caught up with him. He pulled a gun, marshal fired back. Coleman shook his head. Died in the street. Coroner confirmed it this morning. You're sure? Margaret's voice was barely audible. You're absolutely sure. Saw the body myself before I rode out here. It's him. He's dead. Coleman looked at her with something like sympathy. You can stop running now, ma'am. It's over. Margaret made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Her knees gave out, and Tom caught her lowering them both to the ground, while she shook apart in his arms. He's really gone, she gasped. Really gone, Tom murmured into her hair. You're safe. Annie's safe. It's over. Behind them, Samuel let out a shout of pure relief. Josie was crying her hand over her mouth. Inside the house, they heard Annie's voice, clear and strong and rising above everything else. Mama, Mama, come quick! Margaret pulled away from Tom and ran inside. Tom followed Coleman, trailing behind. They found Annie standing in the middle of the room, her face alight with something that might have been joy. The bad man's gone, Annie asked. Yes, baby, he's gone, forever. So I can stay? I can stay here forever. Forever and ever. Annie threw herself at Margaret, and for the first time since her mother died, the little girl laughed. It was a rusty sound, like something long unused, finally remembering its purpose, but it was real and bright and full of hope. Josie laughed too, then Samuel, then Margaret. Tom found himself smiling so wide his face hurt, and even Coleman was grinning despite the grim nature of his news. Well, the sheriff said, guess I'll leave you folks to it. Appreciate you coming all this way to tell us, Tom said, shaking his hand. Least I could do. Coleman tipped his hat to Margaret. You take care of that little one, ma'am. She's been through hell and back. I will. I promise. After Coleman left the house, erupted into something that felt like celebration, even though nobody quite knew how to celebrate a death. But it wasn't really the death they were celebrating, it was the life that could finally begin now. The future that was no longer shadowed by fear. That night, they had a real dinner. Margaret cooked enough food for 10 people, her hands moving with a confidence they hadn't had before. Samuel and Josie set the table together, their earlier antagonism completely gone. Annie helped by placing a flower she'd drawn at each seat, crooked and childish, but beautiful in its honesty. Tom watched them all, feeling something profound settle into his bones. This was his family now. Not by blood or even by choice initially, but by survival and struggle, and choosing each other every day despite everything. When they sat down to eat, Margaret raised her water glass. 2 second chances, she said, her voice steady. To family, Tom added. To being brave, Josie said. To not running anymore. Samuel contributed. Annie looked around at all of them, then lifted her own small glass. To home. They clinked glasses and drank, and in that moment, Tom Brennan understood something fundamental about life, that family wasn't about perfection or planning. It was about showing up, about fighting for each other, about choosing love even when fear said to run. They ate and laughed and told stories long into the night. And when the children finally fell asleep in their pallets by the fire, Margaret and Tom sat together in the quiet. I keep waiting to wake up, Margaret whispered. You said that before. I know, but this time it feels different. Like maybe I'm allowed to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. She looked at him. Like maybe I'm allowed to be happy. You're more than allowed. You're entitled. Tom took her hand. Question is, what kind of happy you want? What do you mean? I mean, we got options now. You're free. Annie's safe. You could go anywhere, do anything. Don't have to stay here if you don't want to. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You trying to get rid of me, Thomas Brennan? Opposite. I'm trying to make sure you're staying for the right reasons. And what are the right reasons? That you want to. That this ain't just shelter or safety, but somewhere you actually want to build a life. Margaret turned to face him fully. Tom, I have been running for so long, I forgot what it felt like to want to stay somewhere. But here with you with the children, I'm not running anymore. I'm choosing. And I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Tom's throat was tight. You sure? More sure than I've been about anything in my life. She squeezed his hand. So if that offer of marriage still stands, it stands. Then ask me properly. Tom laughed, then slid off his chair and knelt in front of her. Margaret Holloway, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of helping me raise these children and run this ranch and build a life that's worth all the fighting we did to get here? Yes. She was crying and smiling at the same time. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her, then slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. When? Tom asked. Soon. As soon as we can arrange it. Tomorrow. Margaret laughed. Give me at least a week to make a proper dress. Deal. They sat together until the fire burned low, making plans, dreaming out loud, building a future that neither of them had imagined a month ago, but both of them wanted with everything they had. Outside the mountain stood silent and eternal. Inside, 5 people slept under one roof, no longer running, no longer alone, no longer waiting for the next disaster, but finally allowing themselves to hope. And in the morning, they would wake up to their first day of forever, together. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Margaret spent her evenings sewing by lamplight, transforming an old dress of Anna's that Tom had kept in a trunk into something new. Josie had offered it without being asked, appearing one morning with the folded fabric in her arms. Mama would want someone to wear it, Josie had said quietly. And I think she'd like that it's you. Margaret had cried then, holding the dress like it was made of glass, understanding the gift for what it really was. Acceptance, blessing, permission to move forward without erasing what came before. Now, on the morning of the wedding, Margaret stood in the bedroom while Josie helped button the back of the dress. It fit perfectly after Margaret's alterations, the deep blue fabric bringing out the color of her eyes. Annie sat on the bed watching her own new dress sewn by Margaret from fabric Tom had bought in town, making her look like a different child entirely. You look pretty, Mama, Annie said. Her voice was still soft, still tentative, but it came more easily now. Each day she spoke a little more, reclaiming the parts of herself that fear had stolen. You think so? Margaret turned to look at herself in the small mirror. A stranger stared back, someone with color in her cheeks and hope in her eyes, instead of the hollow-faced woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach. Papa's gonna cry when he sees you, Josie said matter-of-factly. He cried at Mama's wedding too. Grandma told me. Is that all right? Margaret asked carefully. That he's marrying again. Josie was quiet for a moment, her hand stilling on the buttons. I used to think it wasn't. Used to think letting anyone else in meant forgetting Mama, but then I realized something. What's that? Papa ain't forgetting. He's just making room for more love. And Mama always said love don't run out. You got love for one person, you got love for everyone. Josie finished the last button. So yeah, it's all right. Margaret turned and pulled the girl into a fierce hug. Thank you for giving me a chance, for giving all of us a chance. You saved Annie, saved Samuel, gave them a home when nobody else would. Josie pulled back, her young face serious. That makes you family, wedding or no wedding. A knock on the door interrupted them. Samuel's voice came through, nervous and formal. They're ready for you. If you're ready, I mean. Margaret took a deep breath. I'm ready. They'd decided on a simple ceremony in the house, rather than riding to town. The preacher had agreed to come up the mountain, and Dutch had brought his wife and a few neighbors, who'd become friendly with Tom over the years. It wasn't a crowd, but it was enough witnesses, enough well-wishers, enough people to make it feel real. Tom stood by the fireplace in his Sunday best, his hair slicked back, his hands fidgeting with his hat. When Margaret appeared in the doorway, he went completely still. His eyes widened, then filled with tears, exactly like Josie had predicted. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. Margaret smiled and crossed the room to him. Samuel walked beside her, having volunteered to give her away. When they reached Tom, Samuel placed Margaret's hand in his. "You take care of her," Samuel said, his voice cracking, "or I'll make you regret it." "I will," Tom promised. "On my life I will." The preacher cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Tom barely heard the words. He was too focused on Margaret's face, on the way she looked at him, like he'd hung the moon on the slight trembling of her hands that told him she was just as nervous as he was. When it came time for vows, his voice shook but held steady. "I, Thomas Brennan, take you, Margaret Holloway, to be my wife. I promise to protect you and cherish you and stand by you through whatever comes. I promise to love your family as my own and to build a home where fear has no place and hope has room to grow. I promise to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me and to spend every day trying to deserve the gift of your love." Margaret's tears spilled over. "I, Margaret Holloway, take you, Thomas Brennan, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to support you and strengthen you, and remind you that you are good and worthy and loved. I promise to honor the memory of what came before, while building a future that's all our own. I promise to love your daughter as I love my own family, and to make this house a home for all of us. And I promise to never stop being grateful that you saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself." The preacher smiled. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Tom, you may kiss your bride." Tom cupped Margaret's face in his calloused hands and kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious that might break. When they pulled apart, the small gathering erupted in applause. Josie was crying openly now. Samuel was grinning so wide it looked painful. Annie clapped her small hands together, laughing that rusty laugh that got a little easier each time they heard it. Dutch's wife had brought a cake, and they cut it together while everyone crowded around. The children got the first slices, and Annie got frosting on her nose, which made everyone laugh. For a few hours the house filled with joy so pure it felt like medicine. As the sun started setting, and the guests prepared to leave, Dutch pulled Tom aside. "You done good," the old man said. "Real good. That family of yours, it's something special." "I know," Tom said quietly. "Still can't quite believe it's real." "Believe it. You earned it." Dutch clapped him on the shoulder. "And Tom, Anna would have approved, just so you know." Tom's throat tightened. "You think so?" "I know so. She always said you had too much love in you to keep it locked away. Said if something ever happened to her, she hoped you'd find someone to share it with." Dutch's eyes were kind. "You did. Be happy about it." After everyone left and the children were finally asleep, Samuel in the loft, Josie and Annie sharing the small bedroom, Tom and Margaret stood together on the porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Mrs. Brennan," Tom said softly. "That's me now," Margaret replied, wonder in her voice. "Margaret Brennan. How's it feel? Like coming home after a long journey, like finally being allowed to rest." She leaned into him. "Like maybe all the running and fear was worth it, because it led me here." Tom wrapped his arm around her. "What do you want, Margaret? For the future, I mean. What do you dream about now that you're allowed to dream again?" She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I want Annie to grow up knowing she's loved. I want Samuel to finish growing into the good man he's already becoming. I want Josie to remember her mama, but also know she can have more than one woman in her life to guide her." Margaret paused. "And I want more children. Our children. If that's something you want too." Tom's heart stuttered. You mean that? I do. I want babies that are half you and half me. Want this house full of noise and chaos and love? She turned to look up at him. Is that too much to ask? It's everything I didn't know I wanted until you said it. Tom kissed her forehead. Yeah, I want that too. All of it. They stood there until the cold drove them inside, then banked the fire and went to their room. The bedroom that had been his alone for 3 years and was now theirs together. Margaret was nervous, her hands shaking as she undid her hair. But Tom was patient, gentle, treating her like something infinitely precious. I've only been with one man before, she whispered. My sister's husband. It wasn't. I know. Tom caught her hands. This ain't that. This is us choosing each other. Nobody taking, nobody forcing. Just two people who love each other. I do love you, Margaret said like she was testing the words. I know it's fast, but I do. I love you too. Have since you stepped off that stagecoach looking terrified, but still standing tall. They came together slowly, learning each other, building trust through touch and whispered promises. And when Margaret finally fell asleep in his arms, Tom lay awake, listening to her breathe, feeling more complete than he had in years. The months that followed were the happiest Tom could remember. Winter gradually loosened its grip, snow melting into spring, and with the change of seasons came changes in the family too. Annie's nightmares became less frequent. Samuel shot up 3 inches and started helping with the heavier ranch work, without being asked. Josie and Annie became inseparable, more sisters than friends. And Margaret bloomed. Not just physically though, by April, it was clear she was pregnant, but emotionally. She laughed more, sang, while she worked. Touched Tom freely with affection instead of hesitation. The haunted look in her eyes faded, replaced by contentment. One evening in late May, Tom found her in the garden. She'd planted her hands in the soil, her belly just starting to show. She looked up when he approached, her face glowing in the sunset light. Look, she said, pointing to tiny green shoots. The tomatoes are coming up, and the beans. By summer we'll have more vegetables than we know what to do with. Then we'll learn to preserve them. Tom knelt beside her. How are you feeling? Tired? Happy? Grateful? She touched her stomach. Scared sometimes, but in a good way. The way you're supposed to be scared about things that matter. You're gonna be a wonderful mother. You already are. Annie's different than a baby. Babies are helpless, need everything. Margaret's voice wavered. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not enough? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do. Tom covered her hand with his. You ain't alone in this, Margaret. Not ever again. She leaned against him, and they stayed there until Josie's voice called them for supper. The baby came in October, a boy with Tom's eyes and Margaret's determination. They named him Jacob after Margaret's father, and his arrival completed something in all of them. Josie doted on him with surprising gentleness. Samuel carved him toys from scrap wood. Annie sang to him in her still, quiet voice, made up songs about mountains and safety and home. By the time Jacob was 6 months old, the ranch had become something none of them had imagined that first desperate winter. It was loud and chaotic and full of life, children running through the house, laundry hanging on lines, meals that required 3 pots instead of 1. It was arguments about chores and laughter at dinner and bedtime stories that went too late because nobody wanted the day to end. It was family. One evening the following spring, Tom stood on the porch watching his world in motion. Samuel was in the barn teaching Josie how to saddle a horse properly, while she complained loudly about his instructions. Margaret sat in the rocking chair with Jacob on her lap and Annie pressed against her side, all 3 of them watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Inside, he could hear the sounds of home, the creak of floorboards, the rattle of dishes, the hum of life continuing. Margaret looked up and caught his eye. What are you thinking about? How different everything is from 2 years ago. Good different or bad different? Best different. Tom moved to sit on the porch rail. I was dead inside before you came, just going through motions, raising Josie, but not really living. And now, He gestured at everything around them. "Now I'm alive again." "We all are," Margaret said softly. "You gave us that. You and this mountain and this stubborn refusal to turn away when anyone else would have. I didn't do nothing except say yes to what showed up on my doorstep. You did everything. You saw people who needed saving and you saved them. You saw a family that needed building and you built it." Margaret's voice was thick with emotion. "You took broken pieces and made something whole." Annie tugged on Margaret's sleeve. "Mama, tell the story." "What story, baby?" "About how we got here. About the stagecoach and the snow, and how Papa chose us." Margaret looked at Tom, a question in her eyes. He nodded. "All right," Margaret said, settling Annie more comfortably. "Once upon a time there was a woman who was running from something terrible. She was so scared and so tired, and she had 2 children depending on her to keep them safe. She didn't think anyone would help them. She'd learned that people mostly look away from trouble. But then the stagecoach came to the mountain." Annie interrupted, having heard this story many times. "Then the stagecoach came to the mountain," Margaret agreed. "And there was a man waiting. A good man who'd been lonely for a long time. And when he saw the woman and the children, he didn't turn them away. He said 3 words that changed everything." "What words?" Annie asked, even though she knew. "He said, 'You're staying here.'" Margaret's eyes were locked on Tom's now. "And we did. We stayed, and we fought, and we built a home out of hope and stubbornness and love that none of us knew we were capable of. And we lived happily ever after." Annie's voice was tentative, like she still wasn't sure that was allowed. "We lived," Tom said, his voice rough. "We lived real and messy and complicated, with hard days and good days and everything in between. But we lived together, and that made all the difference." Samuel and Josie came up from the barn arguing about something inconsequential and joined them on the porch. Jacob started fussing, and Margaret handed him to Tom, who took his son with practiced ease. The baby settled immediately, one tiny hand gripping Tom's finger. They sat together as the sun finished setting and stars began to appear. Nobody spoke much. They didn't need to. Everything important had already been said in the 2 years of choosing each other, of fighting for each other, of building something that looked nothing like what any of them had planned, but was better than anything they could have imagined. A cold wind blew down from the mountains, carrying the promise of winter. Inside the house, lamps glowed warm. Tom looked at each face around him. Margaret's peaceful contentment, Samuel's quiet strength, Josie's fierce protectiveness, Annie's slowly healing joy, Jacob's innocent trust. His family, built from strangers and desperation, held together by choice and courage. "Thank you," he said quietly. Nobody asked what for. They all knew. Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. "No, thank you." And in that moment, Thomas Brennan understood something profound about mercy and second chances, and the way life rewrites itself when you're brave enough to say yes to what you didn't plan for. He'd sent for 1 bride and gotten 3 souls who needed saving. He'd opened his door to strangers and found family. He'd risked his heart on hope and discovered it was the best risk he'd ever taken. The mountains stood eternal behind them, silent and steady. The ranch spread out below every acre, a testament to survival and hard work. Inside, the fire burned warm. Outside, the stars blazed cold and bright. And somewhere between earth and sky, between past and future, between what was lost and what was found, a family sat together in the gathering dark, no longer running, no longer alone, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. They had earned their peace. They had fought for their home. And they had chosen love when fear said to close their hearts. That choice, Tom knew, made all the difference. That choice was everything. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying no warnings, now only witness. And the house that had stood empty for so long finally knew what it was built for, not shelter from the storm, but a place where broken people could become whole again, where strangers could become family, where hope lived, not as a promise, but as something real, you could touch and hold and build a future on. Tom Brennan had lost everything once and thought he'd never recover. But sitting here with his wife beside him, his children around him, and his heart finally at peace, he understood that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what matters most. Sometimes the family you're meant to have isn't the one you planned for, but the one that shows up desperate and afraid and asking for mercy. And sometimes if you're brave enough, stubborn enough, and willing enough to say yes to what terrifies you, that family becomes the greatest gift you'll ever receive. The last light faded from the sky. Margaret started singing softly some lullaby from her childhood. The children's voices joined in, then Tom's rough baritone. Their song rose into the night, a hymn of thanksgiving for survival and second chances and the stubborn resilience of hope. They had come through winter and found spring. They had faced death and chosen life. They had known fear and learned courage. And through it all, they had held on to each other with everything they had, building home not from wood and stone, but from the daily choice to stay, to fight, to love. That was the only story that mattered. That was the truth worth telling. That was the legacy they would pass down, not perfection, but perseverance. Not ease, but earned joy. Not fairy tales, but real life lived with fierce determination and open hearts. The mountains remembered. The stars witnessed. And 5 people who'd started as strangers became forever family bound not by blood alone, but by something stronger. The choice to see worth in each other when the world said to look away, to offer shelter when it would have been easier to close the door, to believe in redemption when mercy seemed like foolishness. Tom Brennan had made that choice. Margaret had accepted it. And together they had built a life that proved the most powerful force in the world isn't fear or anger or despair. It's the simple, stubborn act of choosing love when everything else says to give up. That choice saved them all. That choice made them family. And that choice, renewed every single day, would carry them through whatever came next. Because they weren't running anymore. They were home.